How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chof Gimel, Daf 23 of Masechta Menachos. Friends, Daf 23 of Masechta Menachos is a brick wall. I didn't last even 24 hours. Didn't even last one episode. Yesterday, or was it the day before? 2 days ago, I finally, after months, managed to get ahead by one page. And I had told myself, never again was I going to allow a situation where the daf is not ready when it's supposed to be ready. I said, from now on, there is always going to be a daf ready at the same time every single day. I broke that promise immediately. Not even one daf was out on time. Anyways. Daf Chof Gimel, it's like it's anybody who's had a dream of getting ahead of Masechta Menachos. Daf Gimel, Chof Gimel is here to say, don't dream. But Chaver, here's the thing: we do dream. No one's going to tell us not to dream. And if Daf Chof Gimel is a brick wall, we'll go over it. Chaver, and Daf Chof Gimel, we talk about Minchas, soless, kometz, plus Minchas, nesachim. Okay, this came up in our Mishnah. I think it came up in our Mishnah, right? What does our Mishnah say? Nesachim kumtza bekometz chaveta Minchas kohanim Minchas kohanim Mashiach. Okay, and what did Rabbi Yehuda say? Rabbi Yehuda had said in our Mishnah Minchas kohanim Mashiach Minchas nesachim psula. Okay, in our Mishnah we had seen that essentially, it's not specifically these, but essentially I'm going to use this as our example, that if you have the kometz of a Minchas soless, for example, that gets mixed together with a Minchas nesachim, so Rabbi Yehuda had said that it's possible, it can't be burnt in the base of Mikdash, on the Mizbech, because the ratios are off. We are going to discuss that. That's probably going to take a really long time. It's 6 lines of Gemara that probably took me, 5-6 hours. So, meaning but took about 2.5 hours to figure out what it was talking about. And then I've got some pretty intricate slides on today's daf. So I spent many hours working on slides for today's daf. So anyways, that is where we're at with that. So now, also adding oil to a minchas, chotei, kometz. These first two sections, I imagine, are going to be a big chunk of today's daf. And then we get to a new Mishnah where and essentially the Gemara really, we dig into same type mixtures, and we dig into those. Even within same type mixtures, you can have different types, subcategories. For example, you can have a few pieces of meat, so it's all meat, and we're going to get into this. It's all meat, but some of it might be kosher, some of it might be not kosher. So then even within meat, you can have different types of meat, and min b'mino, min she'enu mino. So chevra, basically the whole daf, whether we're talking about kometzes getting mixed together with menachos or minchas choteis and minchas nesachims and meat and treifa and shchuta, this is the whole daf. The entire daf is just work, which is givaldik, avodas hakodesh, the best work. But if you're wondering why I couldn't even keep my word for one day, Daf Chof Gimel is why. Friends, let's jump in. All right, friends, we begin Daf Chof Gimel on Daf Chof Beis Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run through it first. I'm not planning to translate it even. As I said, it's like 6 lines of Gemara. I'm just going to run through it just to read it through, and then I'm going to explain everything outside, and then we'll read it again inside afterwards. So, the Gemara says on Daf Chof Beis Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom. Tanat, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, b'minchas kohen Mashiach u'v'minchas nesachim, that if a kometz, I guess I am doing some translating and explaining, but the real explaining is going to be outside, that if a kometz of, for example, a minchas soless gets mixed together with a minchas kohen Mashiach or a minchas nesachim, psula. So the mixture is pasul. Nothing can be offered. Shezo blilasa ave velo vizo blilasa raka, because the mixing of the flour to oil ratio of the Minchas soless is a thicker ratio, 1-to-1, which we're going to talk all about, versus the ratio of the Minchas Kohen Gadol or the Minchas nesachim, which is a 3-to-1 ratio. So 1-to-1 versus 3-to-1, they're incompatible, and therefore, says Rabbi Yehuda, it is pasul. Vein bolo zomizo, and then they swallow it. The Minchas soless absorbs from the Minchas nesachim. I'll use Minchas nesachim for an example, and the Minchas nesachim is diluted, or its ratio is affected by the Minchas soless. Okay, Frakti Gemara Mayhave min b'mino. We should say it's min b'mino. And Rabbi Yehuda says min b'mino is not bottle. Amarava Ksav Rabbi Yehuda Kolshi min b'mino v'davar acher salek is mino k'mishe'eno mishe'eno mino rabba alav mevatlo. Okay, friends, here we go. Those are the 6 lines of the Gemara that we just read. 6 lines that, I don't know, it took me maybe 6 hours. I don't know. This is work over here. It'll probably take us about 20 minutes. All right, friends, I have some slides over here. Really, it's one slide. It's really just one slide that I'm going to work through it in sections. It would be overwhelming, I think, to just show everything all at once. So we're going to work through this slide in sections. You could see that most of the slide for now is grayed out. I've done that just that you kind of see where we're going to get to, so you're not wondering the whole time, when does this end? You can see what we have to get through, but we'll just focus on one section at a time. So just focus on whatever is highlighted at the moment. Okay. I drink a little schluck of coffee. Okay, now, this is really important right here. To understand the relative amounts of what we're talking about in a mincha. Even if you get lost in the math. Now, friends, I made this slide because without a slide, I think the chances of understanding everything I'm going to say, I think are pretty slim. You'd really have to really focus on what I'm saying. I think with the slide, it makes it doable. Certainly if you look on with me on the slide, I think that this is doable if you really pay attention. And also, just I'm gonna link, of course, to the slides in the description for anybody who's either not watching, or I'm also, because it's late already, I'm gonna upload the audio before the videos there, so you'll have the slides in the link. Now, so what I was saying is that even if you do get lost in the math, I hope you won't, but even if you do, a really big takeaway, a really key takeaway from here is at very least and this was a chiddush for me. Part of why it took me so long to understand this Gemara is because initially I wasn't really familiar with the relative amounts of flour to oil and what's being mevatel what and how much flour really is there and how much oil is there. The point is, there's a lot more flour than there is oil. Okay? So when we talk about a 1-to-1 ratio, it's not really a 1-to-1 ratio. It's 1 isaron to 1 log. But as we see here on the slide, a log of oil is 6 eggs, 6 beitzim, whereas an isaron of flour is 43.2 eggs. Okay, that's more than 7 times the amount. An isaron is more than 7 times the amount of a log. Now, isaron is a dry measure. A log is a wet measure. But nonetheless, I mean, it seems pretty clear to me, as far as I can tell, there's going to be a lot more flour in the mincha than there is going to be oil. Now, even for, let's say, a minchas nesachim, where we're talking about 3 loaves of oil for every isaron of flour, still we're talking about 18 eggs to 43.2 eggs, so still less than half the amount. Okay. Now, also, everything on this slide is kind of there's a reason for the colors. I mean, the reason meaning that, like, all blue is going to refer to oil, all white is going to refer to to flour. And then, okay, so basically I've tried to kind of keep the colors consistent throughout the slide. Now, okay, so we talked about a log of oil being 6 eggs and isaron of flour being 43.2 eggs. Now, a kometz is 1/10 of the size of the mincha, and that is not actually true. It's probably more something like a 50th of the size of mincha, but Chevra, you decide. I felt it was easier to do fractional math with tenths versus 50ths. 43.2 divided by 10 is easier than 43.2 divided by 50, in my opinion. And therefore, I'm just working with the constant that a kometz is 1/10 the size of a full mincha, even though it's not true. It's more like a 50th, but it doesn't matter. We're not here to calculate the size of a kometz, which I think is about the size of a beitza. I mean, it's basically what fits into the palm of your hand. We're here to understand what is batel to what, and using a fraction of a tenth will be just fine and will allow us to actually understand what's going on. Okay, now that we've explained the amount, the size of a log, the size of how many eggs are in a log, how many eggs are in an isaron, the constant size that we're going to use for our kometz, let's move on. A minchas soless is that 1-to-1 ratio, 1 log of oil to 1 isaron of flour. Okay, one log of oil to 1 isaron of flour in a minchas soless. I'm using minchas soless as an example. It could also be a minchas machvas, minchas marcheshes, minchas maifasoner, but I chose minchas soless. It seems like the simplest of, just as an example. I think it's just the simplest. Just some flour, some oil. There's no baking, no breaking up. I think it's an easier example. Now, 1 log of oil to 1 isaron of flour converts to 6 eggs worth of oil to 43.2 eggs worth of flour in a minchas soless. Now, moving on. In minchas nesachim, I hope that you can read that label. I was kind of running out of our colors, of our Babble on Talmud colors to use, so I used kind of a darker red. I think that was the best option that I found. I hope that it is legible, but that dark red is going to be the minchas nesachim, and it'll come up on other parts of the slide. Now, the minchas nesachim, however, now this isn't actually the case for all minchas nesachim, as we're actually going to see a little bit later on the daf on another slide, that actually within minchas nesachim, it depends if it's a cow, a ram, or a sheep. But the assumption we seem to be working with the assumption that we're talking about the minchas nesachim of a sheep, which is a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 logs of oil to 1 isaron of flour, which means 18 eggs worth of oil to 43.2 eggs worth of flour, a little bit less than half the amount of oil than there is flour. Okay, fine. So we have the minchas soless, which is 1-to-1. Oil to flour, and minchas nesachim, which is 3-to-1 oil to flour. Okay, again, logs and isarons, not exactly 1-to-1. Okay, whatever, fine. Now, and finally on our left column, we have the kometz of a minchas soless, because we're really not talking about a minchas soless, we're talking about a kometz of a minchas soless that gets mixed in with a minchas nesachim. And since we are going to just be working with the working assumption that a kometz is 1/10 the size of a regular mincha, so that being the case, so the kometz of a minchas soless is going to be 1/10 of a log of oil to 1/10 of an isaron of flour, which converts to 0.6 eggs worth of oil to 4.32 eggs worth of flour in that kometz. Now, we, of course, are talking about a scenario where this kometz of a minchas soless gets mixed together with the full minchas nesachim. And in that case, Rabbi Yehuda had said that it is possible. Let's look into that. So now moving on. So basically, as you see on the top line, you have a kometz of a minchas soless, which is 0.6 eggs of oil and 4.32 eggs of flour, that gets mixed together with a minchas nesachim, which we said is 18 eggs of oil and 43.2 eggs of flour. So that plus that equals 18.6 eggs of oil and 47.52 eggs worth of flour. So basically, we have this kometz of a minchas soless that gets mixed together with the minchas nesachim, and now it's all mixed together in one big mixture. That mixture contains now 18.6 eggs worth of oil and 47.52 eggs worth of flour. Now, 1/10 plus essentially 10/10, right? The minchas nesachim was 10/10 of, let's say, flour and oil, and the minchas soless was 1/10, so that's 11/10. Now, if we take that whole mixture, if we take both sides of the equation, not really equation, but if we take the oil and the flour, and we therefore divide them into 11 parts, so we'll be able to now isolate the new reality of the kometz and the minchas nesachim, meaning, obviously the flour is going to still be the same, right? The kometz of the minchas soless, the kometz of the minchas soless, after it got mixed in to the minchas nesachim, if we now, let's say, take a kometz from the mixture, that kometz is still going to be 4.32 eggs worth of flour, because there's an isaron in the minchas soless, and there's an isaron in the minchas nesachim, right? The isaron is the same between both of them. It's the oil, the relative amounts of oil that's different. Okay, so therefore the kometz of the minchas soless still is going to be 4.32 eggs. However, if we take, right, when we take 18.6 and divide it by 11 to understand how much oil there is now in the kometz of the minchas soless after it's been mixed together with the minchas nesachim, we will find, moving on, and this is the final kind of state of the slide, that as you see on the left side of the kind of results there in that box is kind of the results of the thing. So we have on the left side the kometz of the minchas soless, and then, right, which is basically 1/11 of the mixture, and the other 10 parts are going to be the minchas nesachim. So if we look at the left side of the box for now, so it says kometz minchas soless. So while in terms of in the white it says 4.32 eggs, right, because that stays the same, 4.32 eggs of flour, the flour stayed the same. However, the oil changed. The ratio of oil to flour in the kometz minchas soless changed, because the minchas, this kometz from the minchas soless initially had 1 part oil to 1 part flour, but when the kometz of the minchas soless got mixed together with the minchas nesachim has 3 parts oil to 1 part flour, and they all got mixed together. And now what happens is that affects the ratio of the kometz of the minchas soless. And as we'll see, it's also, of course, going to affect the ratio of the minchas nesachim. So what do we have now? So when we take the 18.6 eggs of oil and divide that by 11, so you get 1.69 eggs. So basically, the ratio, so for the kometz of the minchas soless, the ratio of oil to flour changed from what was 0.6 eggs of oil to 4.32 eggs of flour. It is now bumped up to 1.69 eggs of oil to 4.32 eggs of flour, i.e. an increase of 1.09 eggs worth of oil. Okay, so again, it went from 0.6 eggs worth of oil to 4.32 eggs worth of flour to 1.69 eggs worth of oil to 4.32 eggs worth of flour. Now, if we look at the right side of this results box, the minchas nesachim, that was downgraded from initially 18 eggs worth of oil to 43.2 eggs worth of flour. Now it's just 16.91 eggs worth of oil to 43.2 eggs worth of flour. So it dropped from 18 to 16.91 eggs. So basically, what do we see here? We see that when the mincha got, that when the kometz of the minchas nesachim, when the kometz of the minchas soless got mixed in with the minchas nesachim, so it messed with the ratios of oil to flour. And as we learned in the Mishnah on Daf Yud Aleph, if there's too little oil in the mincha or too much oil in the mincha is going to be possible. And this is exactly what happened here. The kometz of the Minchas soless now has too much oil in it, and the Minchas nesachim now has too little oil in it, and therefore it's possible. And that's exactly what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yehuda says that when the kometz of the Minchas soless gets mixed in with the Minchas nesachim, it all gets mixed together, and that throws off the ratios of oil to flour, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda says that the mixture is possible. Okay, I'm going to drink a little bit more coffee now. Okay. Now, you may be thinking, and you'd be correct, did we really need to go through all of these numbers in order to understand that? After all, yesterday, I didn't go through all these numbers, and this is really, we just explained the Mishnah. That when you have two things with different ratios of oil that get mixed together, and now they're kind of combined, yeah, it's going to mess up their respective ratios of oil to, I don't know if I said water, but oil to flour. Yeah, you'd be correct. However, we're not done. Because now is where we get to the Gemara's question. And to understand the Gemara, at least this is the way it worked for me, I had to understand the math, and I had to understand the relative amounts of things. Now that we've done all this work to break everything down into its components, we have everything we need to move on. The Gemara asks a question, which is, after all, Rabbi Yehuda had said yesterday that min bimino is not mevatel, right? We had seen yesterday on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol mixes together the blood of the cow and the blood of the goat. There's a lot more cow's blood than there is goat's blood. You would think that the cow's blood would be mevatel the goat's blood, and it should all just be considered cow's blood, but no. The goat blood retains its integrity. I don't know if integrity is the right word, but it's the word I'm using to say that it stays the same. It's still there. Okay, it retains its integrity. So we had seen, according to Rabbi Yehuda, that min bimino is not batel. According to Rabbi Yehuda, min bimino is not batel, retains its integrity. So the Gemara asks, 1 second. We have this Minchas soless, this kometz of the Minchas soless, that gets mixed in to the Minchas nesachim. We said that the flour stays the same. That didn't change, right? The Minchas soless and the Minchas nesachim both have an isar, or both one isar and a flour. So the relative amounts of flour are the same between the two types of menachos. Nothing changed there. What changed? The different oil levels. That when it comes to the Minchas soless, we're talking about a 1-to-3 ratio, and when we're talking about the Minchas nesachim, we're talking about a 3-to-1 ratio, and therefore what happens is when the kometz of the Minchas soless gets mixed in with the Minchas nesachim, the ratio, the oil from the Minchas nesachim floods the Minchas soless, and now the oils mix together, which means that now our kometz contains more oil, and now our kometz from the Minchas soless is too oily. But the Gemara's question is, wait a second. So if the flour doesn't matter, because that stayed the same, what happened was the oils mixed together, but that's min bimino. The oils, first of all, when I'm explaining this, I'm explaining it as I understand it. I simply hope I understand it correct. I can't say that for sure, but I can tell you I have a mahalach here, and I hope that my mahalach is correct. It actually, it at least adds up and makes sense to me. I hope I got it right. But anyways, so we have these oils that mix together, and we have this mixture of oils. As we said, right, in the kometz of the Minchas soless, initially 0.6 eggs worth of oil. Now it's 1.69 eggs worth of oil, which means if you look on the bottom, on the left side of our results box, on the left side by the kometz Minchas soless, on the third line there, it says 0.6 eggs plus 1.09 eggs to 4.32 eggs. So basically, whereas initially we had 0.6 eggs worth of oil in our kometz of the Minchas soless, now we have 1.69 eggs worth of oil, meaning 0.6 eggs worth plus 1.09 eggs worth of oil that were introduced by the Minchas nesachim. They came from the Minchas nesachim. So the Gemara's question is that if essentially really what we're concerned with is the oils mixing together, that's min b'mino. 0.6 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas soless plus 1.09 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim. Those are joining together, but it's min b'mino. It should not be batel, which means that even once they join together, the 1.09 eggs worth of oil does not belong to the Minchas soless. It's not batel. It still belongs to the Minchas nesachim. And even when they're combined, we still say, sure, there's this, mathematically speaking, we're talking about 1.69 eggs worth of oil for every 4.32 eggs worth of flour, but under the hood, really, it's only 0.6 eggs worth of that is for the Minchas soless. The other 1.09 eggs worth of oil doesn't belong to the Minchas soless. It still belongs to the Minchas nesachim. So if we say if Rabbi Yehuda says min b'mino isn't batel, why is he so concerned that the kometz of the Minchas soless is mixing together with the Minchas nesachim and it's throwing off the oil ratios? It shouldn't be throwing off the oil ratios, because that 1.09 eggs worth of oil that mathematically affects the ratio of oil to eggs in 1/11th of the mixture, but still, in terms of how we treat it, we still treat it as only 0.6 eggs worth of oil in the kometz really belongs to the Minchas soless. The rest is still the Minchas nesachim. What's Rabbi Yehuda's problem? I hope that was clear. So the Gemara answers. Rava says, again, this is all outside. We'll then read it in afterwards. That Rava answers and he says, well, here's the thing. This is what's called min b'mino v'davar acher. You have min b'mino, you have the oil from the Minchas soless, and you also have the oil from the Minchas nesachim, and then you have a davar acher, you have a third part here, which is not oil, it's flour, it's the flour. So you have oil, and flour. You have min b'mino v'davar acher. And says Rava that Rabbi Yehuda holds that when you have min b'mino v'davar acher, what you do is you remove from the equation the oil from the Minchas soless, right? This kometz of the Minchas soless was oil and flour. Remove the oil from the Minchas soless right? So basically the 0.6 eggs worth of oil from that kometz that belongs to the Minchas soless, remove that. And what you're left with is the 1.09 eggs worth of oil that were introduced from the Minchas nesachim, and that is now being compared to the 4.32 eggs worth of flour from the kometz of the Minchas soless, which is min b'she'eno mino, flour and oil. And now we compare the two. So again, we've removed the 0.6 eggs worth of oil belonging to the kometz of the Minchas soless, and what we're left with is the 1.09 eggs worth of oil that were introduced from the Minchas nesachim, being compared with the 4.32 eggs worth of flour from the kometz of the Minchas soless. And as we see, there's a lot more flour in the kometz than there is oil, right? Even after the oil was introduced from the Minchas nesachim, we're still talking about 1.09 eggs versus 4.32 eggs of flour. And therefore the flour of the kometz of the Minchas soless is mevatel the 1.09 eggs worth of oil that were introduced from the Minchas nesachim, which therefore makes the Minchas, this oil from the Minchas nesachim, part of the kometz of the Minchas soless now, because the flour of the Minchas soless was mevatel the 1.09 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim, which means that now this 1.09 eggs worth of oil is now part of the kometz of the Minchas soless. And now that we're saying that the 1.09 eggs worth of oil is not part of the Minchas nesachim anymore, but rather part of the Minchas soless, now when we look at the entire kometz of this Minchas soless, when we reintroduce the 0.6 eggs worth of oil, we actually do find that in fact we have 1.69 eggs worth of oil for the minchas, the kometz of the minchas soless, that it grew from a mere 0.6 eggs worth of oil to 1.69 eggs worth of oil belonging to the minchas, the kometz of the minchas soless, which means that yes, that was taken away from the minchas nesachim, and therefore all we have left for the minchas nesachim is 16.91 eggs worth of oil to 43.2 eggs worth of flour, which means that its ratio dropped from 18 eggs oil to 43.2 eggs flour to 16.91 eggs. So we see that actually, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who says min b'mino is not batel, but in this case it's min b'mino v'davar acher, and ultimately what's going to happen is the ratios are going to be affected, and therefore, because Rabbi Yehuda holds that the ratios are affected, now in the kometz of the minchas soless there is too much oil, and in the minchas nesachim there is too little oil, and that is why they are pasul. Sheesh Louise. Yeah, I don't see how it would be possible to understand this Gemara without doing all that work. I tried to understand the Gemara without doing all that work, and I couldn't understand it. The key for me was to realize the relative, and that's, as I said, even if you got lost in the math, which I hope you didn't, but even if you did get lost in the math, a key takeaway is to realize that there's a lot more flour than there is oil, which allowed me to finally understand why it is that the flour is being mavatal the oil, because there's a lot more of it. Okay. Friends, now that we've done all of the work outside and we've gone through the slide and looked at all the measurements and things, we'll read through the Gemara and we should be able to go through it quicker. I'm going to leave up the slide on the screen so that as we go through the Gemara, you have all these numbers and amounts in front of you as we go through it. I'm going to have a little bit more coffee. I feel like I'm almost basically done with my coffee now, and we haven't even started the daf. I basically drank a whole cup of coffee. All right. Also, I have a chavrusa in 45 minutes. I already told him that I'm likely going to be late. I just really can't fall behind here because I finally was about to pull ahead. I'm still determined. I'm still determined to get on stable footing. Okay. Here we go. Chav Beis, Amud Beis. We're not even up to today's daf yet. Okay. Here we go. 3 lines from the bottom. Tanach Rabbanon. No. Tanan. We learned in our Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer says Rabbi Yehuda, Minchas koin Mashiach b'minchas koin Mashiach u'v'minchas nesachim. If the kometz from the minchas soless, from a minchas soless, it doesn't have to call again. It could be really any minchas nedava. But anyways, I've been using minchas soless as an example. If a kometz of a minchas soless gets mixed together with a minchas koin Mashiach, or with a minchas nesachim, which those are examples of a ratio of 3-1 versus 1-1. Obviously, you know I'm talking about logs to isaruns. Psula, so Rabbi Yehuda says that it's psula. Why? Shezo bli lasa ave, because a minchas soless has a thicker, I don't know if you call it dough, but basically combined flour and oil. It's a 1-to-1 ratio of oil to flour. V'zo bli lasa raka, whereas the minchas nesachim, the minchas kohen Mashiach, they are oilier because they are 3 parts oil, right? 3 logs of oil to 1 isarun of flour, and therefore when the kometz of the minchas soless gets mixed together with the minchas nesachim, the minchas basically throws everything off. As we saw, there's now too much oil in the kometz of the minchas soless and too little oil in the minchas nesachim. Okay. So, Shizah blila so ave, because the minchas soless has a thicker blila, a thicker mixture, V'zo blila so raka, and the minchas nesachim has a thinner, an oilier mixture. And they absorb, they swallow from one to the other, and now there's too much oil for one and too little oil for the other. To which the Gemara asks, who cares that they have swallowed and absorbed from one to the other? Have min b'minohu. I'm sorry, my have min b'minohu. As we talked about at length, the oils mixing together, who cares? They should retain their integrity. Just to get back into some details, if we're looking at the kometz of the Minchas soless, which bumped up from 0.6 eggs of oil initially to be 1.69 eggs of oil, but who cares? The additional 1.09 eggs worth of oil that's now in the kometz of the Minchas soless is min b'mino, kilu, the 0.6 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas kometz of the Minchas soless that joined together with 1.09 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim, and they joined together, who cares? The oil and oil, min b'mino. They should therefore remain separate. And the 1.09 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim still belong to the Minchas nesachim. And the Minchas nesachim still has its full amount of oil. No less. And the kometz of the Minchas soless still has its proper amount of oil. No more. Because what mixed together here was the oils. And it's min b'mino, and all the parts of the mixture still belong to where they came from, and no ratios are being skewed. On my Ravit, but says Ravit, Kasav Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi Yehuda holds that Kolshu min b'mino v'davar acher, that when you have min b'mino, but there's also a davar acher. Sure, we have the oil from the kometz of the Minchas soless and the oil from the Minchas nesachim, but there's a third element here. We can't ignore it. There's also the flour of the kometz of the Minchas soless. So you have min b'mino v'davar acher. We have oil, and flour. And when you have that setup, salik es mino, remove the 0.6 eggs worth of oil that was initially in the kometz of the Minchas nesachim. No, the kometz of the Minchas soless. Get rid of that, remove that from the equation. What you're left with is the oil from the 1.09 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim, and that is being mixed together with the flour, the 4.32 eggs worth of flour from the kometz of the Minchas soless, 4.32 compared with 1.09, the 1.09 is going to be bottled to the 4.32, right? The 1.09 eggs worth is going to be bottled to the 4.32 eggs worth, which means that now the 1.09's worth of eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim is now bottled to the kometz of the Minchas soless, and it's part of the Minchas soless now. As again, salik as mino kmisha eino, get rid of the 0.6 eggs worth of oil out of the equation, the 0.6 eggs worth of oil from the kometz of the Minchas soless, visha eino mino, and the flour, rabba olav, now overwhelms the 1.09 eggs worth of oil from the Minchas nesachim, umevatlo, and is mevatel it to make it part of the Minchas, the kometz of the Minchas soless. However, we just got to the end of that Gemara. So therefore, we see that actually the result is that there is 1.69 eggs worth of oil to 4.32 eggs worth of flour for the kometz of the Minchas soless. There is too much oil now for the Minchas soless and too little oil for the Minchas nesachim, and that is why Rabbi Yehuda says that it is a problem and that this mixture will be possible. Wow, how long did that take? That took 35 minutes to explain. So it took literally, how long did it take us to read that Gemara just now? Maybe less than 5 minutes? Because we went through this slide in such detail, reading the Gemara then took about 5 minutes or maybe even less. But there was all the work that went into understanding. Yeah, basically the point is, once we understood everything, we were then able to read right through the Gemara. I hope that it was, that this was understandable. Okay, now the Gemara continues to actually somewhat of a similar, less complex, but still actually similar scenario. Itmar was stated, kometz de minchas chotei sheshamno. You see what just happened here? I think the Gemara made up a word. I think there's a reason why I'm finding all these words that, I'm not the only one who makes up words. The JPS, what are they, remembrancer? What the heck is that? Sheshamno. The heck does shamno mean? That they added oil to it. They oiled it. Sheshamno. I don't know. Shamno. Itmar kometz de minchas chotei sheshamno. You shamaned it. Minchas chotei. What's a minchas chotei? Who wants to tell me? We learned about it in Masechta Shavuos. Korban olav v'yored. Right, let's say a person accidentally eats kachim and he's tameh. So he brings a korban olav v'yored. If he can afford it, he brings a proper korban chatas. If he can't, he brings birds. If he can't afford that, he brings a flour offering. That's what's called a minchas chotei. A minchas chotei, of course, is right. Lo yosim alei shemen v'lo yitin alei levona. There's no oil. There's no levona. A very simple, humble mincha as a sin offering. Just flour. And the kometz is just flour. Now what happens that they shamnod it? They added oil to it. They took the kometz from the minchas chotei and then oil was added to it. The question is the kometz still kosher or is it possible? Itmar kometz the minchas chotei, the kometz of a minchas chotei sheshamno that got oiled. Rabbi Yochanan Omer says, Rabbi Yochanan pasul. Rabbi Yochanan says the kometz of the minchas chotei is pasul. It needs to be pure flour. It's no longer that. It's got oil in it. It's pasul. Rish Lakish Omar says, Rish Lakish, hu atzmo mishachshecho b'shyari alog u'ma'aleu. To which Rish Lakish disagrees, because according to Rish Lakish, he says that actually even a minchas chotei, this kometz of a minchas chotei, which is advertised as being purely flour, says Rish Lakish, it is not actually purely flour. What they would do is, they would, as we discussed recently, when it comes to oil, if you have oil in a vessel and you empty out the oil from the vessel, there's still residual oil in the vessel, right? It doesn't all just pour out. There's going to be some viscous stuff that remains in there. So therefore, Rish Lakish says that even though you don't officially add oil to the kometz of a minchas chotei, you do kind of pass it through an empty log that has kind of residual oil in there. And there, so the point is there is some amount of oil anyways that ends up being part of the kometz of the minchas chotei. So therefore says Rish Lakish, that being the case, obviously you should not be adding oil to the kometz of the minchas chotei. But if oil was added, the fact of the matter is there's going to be oil in it anyways, and therefore Rish Lakish says the kometz is still kosher. Fact the Gemara, what do you mean that that oil is added to the kometz of the minchas chotei, and that if more oil is added to it, it's still kosher according to Rish Lakish? But the pasuk says, "Lo yasim alei Hashem v'lo yitin alei levona." The pasuk says pretty clearly by minchas chotei that there is no oil and there is no levona. Why would we be adding oil according to Rish Lakish? So, and for the Gemara, ha'ushelo yikbala shemen kichaber. That is that there's no official amount of oil, right? Other menachos have official amounts of oil, a log, 3 logs, whatever it is. Sometimes it can go up to 6 logs even. By the minchas nesachim of a cow, for example. So says Rish Lakish that by minchas chotei there's no official oil in it, but there could be some oil. It's not a big deal. Eis for Rabbi Yochanan, the Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan asks a kasha against Rish Lakish. Charev shenis'ariv b'Babble. A dry kometz. Well, we're gonna have to figure out what it is, but let's talk about it as a dry kometz that gets mixed together with a oiled kometz. Yakriv, it can be offered. Rabbi Yehuda Omer lo yakriv. Rabbi Yehuda says it cannot be offered. My love, kometz de minchas chotei de ayv bekometz minchas nedava. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan asks the kasha of Rish Lakish, and he says, look, we have a tosefta. I actually looked up the toseftas. So just in case you didn't know, in the full-sized Gemaras, there's generally the tosefta in the back of the Gemara. You can actually flip to the back and find the toseftas for that Masechta. Just like every Masechta has Mishnayos. So the Tosefta was edited by Reb Chia and Reb Shaya. And that's the Tosefta, and that's why the Tosefta is considered, right, the most authoritative, of course, is Mishnayos. The next level is the Toseftas, and then kind of the random brises that we ask questions for, but the Tosefta is more authoritative. So I have a small Gemara here that I use, so it doesn't have the Tosefta in the back, but I looked at it, I found it on Safari, I found the Tosefta. I actually looked up the Toseftas. And in Halacha Beis of in Perek Dalet Halacha Beis of the Tosefta, it says that a chariv that gets mixed together with a Babble, and what we're assuming that it means is that what's a kometz that's chariv from a Minchas chotei? It's dry. What the heck is that? Oh no! Wow, my microphone just died. I had to stop recording so I could charge it for 10 minutes. I think it should be enough now to last the rest of the recording. Sheesh, that was insane. Okay, I hope I didn't lose my train of thought. Anyway, so we have this Minchas chariv shenisar b'Babble, right? So I think we were saying, what is this Minchas chariv? So we want to say that the Minchas chariv is a Minchas chotei. That you have a kometz of the Minchas chotei, which is just flour, and it gets mixed together with the kometz of, let's say, a Minchas soless, which is flour and oil. Right, one part flour to one part oil. Now the Chachamim say that you can offer this, that you can offer this mixture, right? The Minchas chotei that gets mixed together with the kometz of a Minchas chotei gets mixed together with the kometz of a Minchas soless. The Chachamim, you could say that you can offer. How come? Well, because they had said yesterday, by the blood of the cow and the blood of the goat, they said the reason why the blood of the goat retains its, retains its integrity is because it's two things that are going on the Mizbeach, right? Two korbanos be'etzim. You have, right, the blood of the cow, the blood of the goat, they're both going on the Mizbeach, they're both going to be offered. And whenever you have two things that are going to be offered, they are not batul. And here you have the kometz of the Minchas chotei, the kometz of the Minchas soless. Both of them are going to be offered on the Mizbeach. Therefore, each one retains its integrity, and therefore it can be offered. Rabbi Yehuda, however, says, and I have a slide for this as well. It is not as intense as the other one. There's a reason why there's a slide, because there's something to talk about. But okay, so I left here at the top of the slide the fact that a log of oil is 6 eggs and a isarin of flour is 43.2 eggs, and that a kometz is 1/10 of that size, but not really. Now, if we're talking about a kometz of a Minchas chotei, all it contains is 1/10 of an isarin, right? Assuming that a kometz is 1/10 of an isarin. So 1/10 of an isarin and 4.32, which is 4.32 eggs worth of flour. Right, so the kometz of a Minchas chotei is simply 4.32 eggs worth of flour. That's it. Now, the kometz of the Minchas soless that is getting mixed together with is 1/10 of a log of oil and 1/10 of an isarin of flour, which is 0.6 eggs of oil and 4.32 eggs worth of flour. Now, according to the principle that Rava had laid out for Rabbi Yehuda earlier, that min b'mino v'davar acher, that when you have two of the same type and something else, in this case, what's the same type? The flour, right? The Minchas chotei is 4.32 eggs worth of flour, and the Minchas soless, the kometz of the Minchas chotei is 4.32 eggs worth of flour. The kometz of the Minchas soless is also 4.32 eggs worth of flour, the kometz of the Minchas soless, but that also has 0.6 eggs worth of oil. So you have flour, and oil. So we say in that case we remove, right? So now, if you look at the slide, we see that by the Minchas soless below, you see that the eggs, that the isaron, the flour from the Minchas soless is crossed out, right? We remove the flour from the Minchas soless. What we're left with is the kometz of the Minchas chotei, right, which is the top of the right side, which is 4.32 eggs worth of flour. And what we're left with is, from the Minchas soless, the kometz of the Minchas soless, 0.6 eggs worth of oil. And what happens is, the 4.32 eggs worth of flour from the kometz of the Minchas chotei will be mevatel the 0.6 eggs worth of oil from the kometz of the Minchas soless, which therefore means that the oil from the Minchas soless will actually be botel to the Minchas chotei, which means that now, and here's the important thing, according to Rabbi Yehuda, therefore, the Minchas chotei is now no longer just flour, but flour and oil. The Minchas chotei is no longer, the kometz of the Minchas chotei is no longer just flour, but rather flour and oil. And because it's flour and oil, therefore it is possible. And even according to the Chachamim who say kosher, they only say kosher because of a technicality. They're not saying kosher because a kometz of a Minchas chotei that should be just flour but has oil in it is no problem. That's not why they say that it's kosher. They say it's kosher because we're talking about a kometz of a Minchas chotei and a kometz of a Minchas soless, two things that go on the mizbech, and therefore they retain their integrity. That's why. So for the Minchas chotei remains just flour. The Minchas soless is the kometz of flour and oil. Everything retains its integrity. But even the Chachamim, we would argue, in the event that the Minchas chotei would no longer be just flour, but would be flour and oil, they would agree with Rabbi Yehuda's conclusion, which is that if the Minchas chotei is flour and oil, it's possible you can't offer it. So again, so let's read it inside. So Rabbi Yochanan to Rish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan has the kasha to Rish Lakish, Chariv shenisari Babble, a kometz of a Minchas chotei that gets mixed together with the kometz of a Minchas soless. Yaakov, according to the Chacham, you can offer it because we're talking about a mixture of Minchas chotei and Minchas soless, two things that are going to be, right, the kometz of each, both of which are going to be burnt in the mizbech, so two things that go on the mizbech, and therefore they retain their integrity. So the Minchas chotei is just flour, and the Minchas soless, right, the kometz of the Minchas soless is the 1-to-1 ratio that it needs. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Lo Yaakov, Rabbi Yehuda says you can't offer it, my la, right, because, right, you can't offer it because, since you have min b'mino v'davar acher, you have the flour of the Minchas chotei, we're talking about kometzes over here, so even if I just say Minchas chotei, it means the kometz of the Minchas chotei, because that's what's being offered in the mizbech. So, you have the flour from the Minchas chotei, you have the flour from the Minchas soless, you also have the oil from the Minchas soless, so you remove the flour from the Minchas soless, and now the oil is bottled to the oil of the Minchas soless is bottled to the flour of the Minchas chotei, which means it's now part of the Minchas chotei, which means that the Minchas chotei now has oil in it, and therefore it's possible. Lo Yaakov, you can't offer it. So my love, so new kometz the Minchas chotei, as we explained, we're talking about a kometz of a Minchas chotei, which should be just flour. The ayr bekometz the Minchas nedava, they got mixed together with the kometz of a Minchas nedava. Again, as I've said, we really could be talking about any of the Minchas nedavas. I've just chosen the Minchas soless because I find it to be the easiest. There's no baking, there's no breaking up things. It's just flour and oil basically. So basically, you have the kometz of the Minchas chotei, they got mixed together with the kometz of the Minchas soless, and we're saying that we have to be concerned about the Minchas the Minchas chotei having oil in it. So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan poses this as a question to Rish Lakish, to which the Gemara answers, Lo nisht. Minchas parim ve'elim beminchas kvasim. Friends, I have another slide, and this is the final slide of today. Not necessarily because the rest of the daf is a walk in the park, but this is the final slide of the day. Now, on this slide, what you see is, when it comes to Minchas nesachim, Minchas nesachim are menachos that accompany certain korbanos. Now, those korbanos could be cows, they could be rams, they could be sheep. So when a korban requires a Minchas nesachim, so if it's a sheep, then it's 3 logs of oil to 1 isaron of, right, it's 3 logs of oil, 1 isaron of flour, for a ratio of 3-to-1. And therefore, when we've been talking about Minchas nesachim being 3-to-1, it's assuming sheep. However, for rams, right, if there's Minchas nesachim required for rams, it's going to be 4 logs of oil and 2 isarins of flour for a ratio of 2-1. And similarly for a cow, which is 6 loaves of oil and 3 isarins of flour, also a ratio of 2-1. Which means that rams and cows have a ratio of oil to flour of 2-1, whereas sheep have a ratio of oil to flour of 3-1. So Rosh Lakish says what the Tosefta is talking about is not, when it says charev and balul, dry and mixed with oil, it is not talking about a minchas chotei being dry and the oily one being the minchas soless. No. The dry one is relatively dry. It's talking about the minchas nesachim of a ram or of a cow, which is merely a ratio of 2-1, versus balul, the oily one, which is the minchas nesachim of a sheep, which is a ratio of 3-1. So the rams and cows are 2-1, which is relatively dry, relative to the sheep, which is oilier, which is 3-1. So again, so answers Rish Lakish, he says, lo, minchas parim ve'elim, when we say minchas charev, it means minchas parim ve'elim, which are relatively drier, but minchas kvasim gets mixed together with the minchas kvasim, which is oilier, because it's a 3 parts oil to 1 part flour. But the Gemara says, wait, but if you look at the Tosefta, it already says in halacha aleph, right? So we had just read, right, the thing with the charev and the balul was perik dalet halacha beis in the Tosefta. However, if you look in the first halacha of the perik dalet halacha aleph, it says minchas parim ve'elim b'minchas kvasim, that if the mincha of parim and elim gets mixed together with parim and kvasim, v'charev shenisari b'balul yikar v'biru omer lo yikar. Okay, if you look, the truth is, if you look at the Tosefta, it's actually, it doesn't. You would think from the Gemara that if we look at the Tosefta, you would be able to find minchas parim ve'elim b'minchas kvasim v'charev shenisari b'balul yikar v'biru omer yikar lo yikar. It doesn't exactly say that. What is there is that perik dalet halacha aleph in the Tosefta is not a little short one-liner. There's a lot of info there. There's a lot of stuff there. And perik dalet halacha beis in the Tosefta of the Menachos is also not a one-liner. There's also a bunch of stuff there. However, at the end of the first halacha, it talks about menachos of cows and sheep and rams getting mixed together. And at the beginning of the second halacha, it talks about the charev and the balul. So therefore, basically what the Gemara is saying is essentially what's happening is that they're one and the same, and that it's the cows and the sheep and the rams that are the balul, that are the charev and the balul, that is talking about the same thing at the end of the first halacha and the beginning of the second halacha, that when it says in the beginning of the second halacha, charev and balul, it's referring to the cows and rams and sheep at the end of the first halacha. So parushi kamefarisha, that's the Gemara's answer, right? So meaning the Gemara asked, I don't understand, why would charev and balul be referring to the cows and the sheep and the rams if it already talks about the cows and the sheep and the rams in the previous halacha? So the Gemara answers, it's explaining it. That the juxtaposition of the cows and the sheep and the rams at the end of the first halacha to the charev and the balul at the beginning of the second halacha means that it's all talking about the same inyan, argues Rish Lakish, and it's not talking about minchas chotei and minchas nesachim. Rish Lakish would argue that if oil got into a minchas chotei, the kometz of minchas chotei would still be kosher. Now says the Gemara, Rava asks, kometz shemitza shamnu al gabe eitzimau. Oh, okay. If you have a kometz, let's say of a minchas soless, and you have a kometz which has in it flour and oil, and you squeeze out the oil onto wood. Mao, what's the halacha? Chibure olin keolin dam, and then you take the kometz and you plop it down on the wood. So you have is oil, which I think the point is it's been absorbed in the wood. Now the oil was supposed to be part of the flour, part of the kometz, but you squeezed the oil out of the kometz, and it seeped into the wood absorbed it, and now you take the flour that's left from the kometz and you just place it right on top of the wood. So the question is this sort of deconstructed kometz acceptable? Chiburi olin koolin damu, do we say that since the flour is touching and connected to the oil that's on the wood, it's okay. It's acceptable. Do we say, no, we can't consider the oil like it's part of the kometz? No good. This is not the machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. The Idmar we stated that Maile Aver she'ein bo kazayis v'etzem hashlimul kazayis givaldik chotei chutz ha'alo b'chutz. Wow, when it rains it pours, huh? That was a difficult sugya. Anyways, we're not gonna dwell on this for long. Ha'alo b'chutz, which we learned all about at the end of Masechtas Zvachim, very difficult sugya. But anyways, as we know, you're not allowed to offer korbanis outside of the Hazara. So, Hamayle Aver she'ein bo kazayis, if you have a limb that is less than a kazayis, ve'etzem hashlimul kazayis, but it's connected to a bone, and together the limb and the bone together are a kazayis. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayav v'Shlokish Amar Potter. Rabbi Yochanan says Chayav for ha'aloha b'chutz, it's a chiyuv kares, whereas Rish Lakish says Potter. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Chayav chiburi olin ka'olin damu. So we want to say that Rabbi Yochanan says Chayav because chiburi olin ka'olin damu, that since the bone is connected to the rest of the limb, I guess to the meat or whatever else is there, so therefore it's considered this all one, and it's a kazayis, and you'll be chayav for that. Rish Lakish Amar Potter chiburi olin lav ka'olin dami, whereas Rish Lakish would say Potter because even though they're connected, it's not considered part of what's being offered as a korban, and therefore you are potter for Allah b'chutz. And in our case of the deconstructed kometz, it would not be considered connected. Tibayla Rabbi Yochanan, Tibayla Rish Lakish, not necessarily. We can have second thoughts, both according to Rabbi Yochanan as well as according to Rish Lakish. Tibayla Rabbi Yochanan, Ad kan lo, kam Rabbi Yochanan also, hele be'etzem, demina debuser, who I can argue that Rabbi Yochanan only says by ha'Allah b'chutz that the limb and the bone of the limb can join together because it's essentially all part of the animal. Avol hai d'lavmina de kometzu, but the oil isn't the same. And oil is oil, flour is flour. Sure, you put them both, they're two ingredients in the kometz, but they're their own independent ingredients. Lo, maybe they would not join together once they've been deconstructed. Odima afilu Rish Lakish lo ka'amar ele be'etzem dibar miparish hu v'iparish lav mitzvah la'adurei. Also Rish Lakish, who says over there that by the bone that it's not considered part of the limb, that's because in the context of korbanos, if the bone falls off of the altar, you don't need to put it back, it's considered separate. Aval shemen delav bar mifarish hu lo. Right, but we see when it comes to the limb, the bone can get separated, and if it gets separated, you don't have to put it back. But by the oil, the oil gets mixed in with the flour, and it just kind of stays in there, and it's part of the kometz. So maybe it's different. Or maybe we say it doesn't make a difference. Teku, we say that we'll go weiter. We don't know the answer about what happens if somebody takes their kometz, squeezes out the oil onto some fire, onto some wood, and then puts the kometz on top of the wood. We don't know the answer to that question. We are going to move on. Okay, friends, now we get up to a new Mishnah and the final section of today's daf, which is digging into same type mixtures. It's an interesting question. Let's maybe go weiter and we will discuss it as we go, I think. Okay, it says the Mishnah, Shtei menachos shelo nikmitzu. If you have two menacheses that you haven't yet kometzed, okay, v'nisarvu zobazo, and they get mixed up. Im yochol likmotz mizo b'fnei atzmo umizo b'fnei atzmo. Ksheris, if you can still identify which one is which, and identify at least which sections of, right, meaning even if they got mixed, right, we're saying that they got mixed together, right, but if you could still say, look, it's like a Venn diagram, right, maybe in the middle they're mixed together, but on the sides you could still tell which mincha is which. So, right, let's call them Reuven the mincha and Shimon the mincha. So you could still see that on the right side, that part is purely Reuven the mincha, enough to scoop out a kometz from it. And to the left side, I could scoop out a kometz from Shimon the mincha, and and there will be pure kometzes, right? Kometz Ruvain will be purely Ruvain, and kometz Shimon will be purely Shimon. That is fine. So again, shtei menachos, two menachos shlo nikmitzu, which are not yet kmitzad, v'nis arvu zobazo, and they got mixed zusammen. Im yochol likmotz mizo b'fnei atzma umizo b'fnei atzma. If you can take a kometz from each one individually and purely, ksheris kosher v'mlab psulis. But if not, that you might be scooping up combinations. So then psulis. Kometz shenis ariv be mincha shelo nikmitza. If you have a kometz, you've already separated a kometz from Reuven the mincha, and that kometz then gets mixed in with Shimon the mincha. So now, in this mixture, you have Shimon the mincha, which has not yet been kometzed, and somewhere in this mincha is Reuven the kometz. Lo yaktir. So you might think, well, what happens if I just burn the whole mixture that includes in it Reuven the kometz? Don't do that. V'miktir, and if you did, zoshe nikmitza ola lebailim. Well, okay, Reuven the mincha has been the kometz from, right, meaning this mixture that is Shimon the mincha and Reuven the kometz, so you shouldn't burn it, but if you do, so then Reuven, who is the owner of Reuven the mincha and Reuven the kometz, so since Reuven the kometz was ultimately burnt on the mizbeach, so Reuven is yotzei for having brought Reuven the mincha. V'zo shelo nikmitza, and Shimon the mincha, which no kometz was ever kometzed from it, lo ola lebailim, does not count for Shimon, who's bringing Shimon the mincha. Okay, so if you have Reuven the kometz that got mixed together with Shimon the mincha, and then the whole mixture was burnt on the mizbeach, so Reuven will be yotzei for having offered Reuven the mincha. Shimon will not be yotzei because no kometz was ever separated from his mincha. Nisariv komtza bisharel. So, what was I? Let me just make sure. I just want to make sure I didn't skip. Zoshe nikmitza ola levailim. Yeah, okay. I don't think I skipped. Okay. This ariv komtza bisharel o bisharel shel chaverta. If Reuven the kometz got mixed together with Reuven the shirayim, meaning so you had Reuven the mincha, and you separated from Reuven the mincha a kometz, so then that means that the rest of Reuven the mincha is shirayim, leftovers. Or if Reuven the mincha, or if Reuven the kometz got mixed together with Shimon the shirayim, i.e. Shimon the mincha, a kometz was already separated from it, and what was left is now Shimon the shirayim. So if Reuven the kometz gets mixed with either Reuven the shirayim or Shimon the shirayim, so lo yaktir, don't offer that mixture, because shirayim, right, says, the pasuk says, lo saktiru mimenu ishel Hashem, right, mimenu ishel Hashem, meaning a mincha that mimenu ishel Hashem, that a kometz from it was already burnt on the mizbeach, lo saktiru, don't burn the shirayim if the kometz has already been offered. So i.e., if Reuven, so that's where we learn, or even separated, right? That's where we learn that shirayim is not offered on the mizbeach, and therefore, if a kometz gets mixed in shirayim, whether it's its own shirayim or shirayim from another mincha, lo yakter, don't burn that combination on the mizbeach. V'mikter ola levailim, if you did, so the kometz that got mixed in will count. And if we're talking about Reuven the kometz, well then Reuven, the owner of Reuven the kometz, will get the credit for the mincha, for Reuven the mincha. Okay, now we get to a machlokas we get to the Gemara, and in the Gemara there's a machlokas between Rav Chizde and Rav Chanina. 1 second. I need to drink more water, but I don't have water. All I have is like the dregs of a coffee. Hopefully that'll help for the drink requirement. Anyways, we are getting to a machlokas between Rab Chanina and Rav Chizda. This machlokas is about exactly what the section is called, digging into same type mixtures. So I think, let's talk about it. I think it makes sense to talk about it outside. Maybe, when I was reviewing it, I was thinking it made sense to talk about it outside, and it does make sense to talk about it outside. Probably what's going to happen, let me read it inside, and probably after about 3 words, I could be like, okay, let's talk about this outside. So says the Gemara, Amr of Chizda, says of Chizda, Nevela, Nevela betela b'shchuta. Okay, she'efshe l'shchuta te'as nevela. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're going to see now a machlokas between Rav Chizda and Rab Chanina. We are talking about mixtures of meat, right? So as we heard, nevela and shchuta. Nevela is treif meat, is non-kosher meat. And nevela is also an avatuma. And shchuta is slaughtered meat, kosher meat. Nevela and shchuta. So if you have 1 piece of nevela and 2 pieces of shchuta, or the other way around, 1 piece of shchuta and 2 pieces of nevela. So we're talking about sach hakol, 3 pieces of meat. So it's min b'mino in that sense. It's all meat. But if you dig into it, not all meat is just meat. It's kosher meat, there's non-kosher meat. There's nevela, there's shchuta. Nevela is not kosher, shchuta is kosher. So now both Rab Chanina, and this is important, both Rab Chanina and Rav Chizda agree in principle that min b'mino is not batel, and min b'she'eino mino is batel. So if we're talking about a mixture of nevela and shchuta, so if we have 1 piece of nevela and 2 pieces of shchuta, so the nevela will be batel to the shchuta, and vice versa. If we have 1 piece of shchuta and 2 pieces of nevela, the shchuta is batel to the nevela. But if we have basically all shchuta, so then be'etzem nothing is batel. So meaning, okay. Okay, so now here's the thing, friends. Here's the thing. You see, nevela can actually become like shchuta to the extent that nevela is tameh. Nevela is an avatuma. But nevela that becomes rancid is no longer metame. Because the pasuk says by nevela, o machor l'nochri, that you could potentially sell it to a nochri, to a Gentile. But you're only going to sell it to a Gentile if it's good, healthy, edible meat, not if it's all rancid. Once it's rancid and disgusting, it's no longer considered nevela, and it's no longer metame as an avatuma either. So nevela becomes like shchuta in that sense that ultimately, if allowed to go rancid, it will not be metame anymore, just like shchuta is not metame. So therefore, we can, in a sense, say that nevela, since nevela can become like shchuta, it would be considered min b'mino. And if it's min b'mino, then it is actually not batel. However, shchuta can never become like nevela. Once the meat is shechted and it's kosher, it's never going to be like nevela, and therefore that would be a combination of min b'she'eno mino. Now, the machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rab Chanina is regarding how we determine whether are we treating it like nevela, in which, right, are we going from the perspective of nevela, which can become shchuta and therefore it's min b'mino, or are we going from the perspective of the shchuta, which can never be like the nevela, and therefore it's going to be min b'she'eno mino. And Rav Chizda says that we determine this based on the mevatel, based on the majority, the one that is going to be mevatel, the minority. So therefore, Rav Chizda says, if you have a combination of 2 pieces of shchuta meat and 1 piece of nevela meat, Rav Chizda says we go from the perspective of the mivatel, of the 2 pieces of shchuta meat. And since the 2 pieces of shchuta can never be nevela, so therefore it's min b'she'eno mino, and the nevela is batel to the shchuta. But if it's the other way around, if it's 2 pieces of nevela and 1 piece of shchuta, and we go from the perspective of the mivatel of the nevela can be like the shchuta in that it can lose its tumah if it becomes rancid. And therefore we will consider it min b'mino, and therefore the shchuta is not batel. Right, I hope I said these things right. So when we have 2 pieces of shchuta and 1 piece of nevela, since the shchuta cannot be like the nevela, it's min b'she'eno mino, and the nevela would be batel to the shchuta. And if we have 2 pieces of nevela and 1 piece of shchuta, since the nevela can be like the shchuta and lose its tumah over time, so therefore it's min b'mino and not batel. Reb Chanina agrees with Rav Chizda in principle that min b'mino is not batel and that min b'she'eno mino is batel. However, where he disagrees is that he says it's not from the perspective of the mivatel of the 2, rather it's from the perspective of the batel, of the one that is batel from the 1. I.e., if you have 2 pieces of shchuta and 1 piece of nevela, well, since the nevela, which is the batel, can become like the shchuta, so it's min b'mino and not batel. And if it's 2 pieces of nevela, 1 piece of shchuta, from the perspective of the shchuta, since it can't become nevela, it's min b'she'eno mino and it is batel. Okay, let's now read it inside. Rav Chizda says, Rav Chizda, nevela betela b'shchuta, that 1 piece of nevela will be batel to 2 pieces of shchuta because she'i efshar l'shchuta, because from the perspective of the mivatel, from the shchuta is unable to be like the nevela. Therefore, it's min b'she'eno mino. She'i efshar l'shchuta she'ti'asa nevela. Shchuta can never become like nevela. Therefore, it's min b'she'eno mino, and the nevela is batel to the shchuta. The shchuta ain't a betela b'nevela, but the other way around, 1 piece of shchuta and 2 pieces of nevela, she'efshar l'nevela she'ti'asa shchuta, since the 2 pieces of nevela can become like the shchuta, dilchim masricha parcha tumasa, that when they become rancid, they lose their tumah, and therefore they're no longer tameh, just like the shchuta is not tameh. And therefore it's considered min b'mino, and the shchuta is not batel. Rav Chanina says the opposite. Rav Chanina Amar kol she'efshar lo lios kamo eino batel. If the minority, if the batel one is able to be like the majority, so therefore if there's 1 nevela and 2 shchutas, since the nevela can be like the shchuta, it's min b'mino and not batel, so eino batel. And if we're talking about 1 piece of shchuta versus 2 pieces of nevela, the shchuta is unable to be like the nevela, so batel, so it's min b'she'eno mino, and the shchuta will be batel. Now, aliba deman. Now, who is this like? Who says this? Right? We've just been saying that both Reb Chanina and Rav Chizda agree that min b'mino is not batel, min b'she'eno mino is batel. That min b'mino is not batel, min b'she'eno mino is batel. Who agrees with that? Other than Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina, who are Amoraim, who agrees with that? Aliba deman, ir aliba derabanon, ha'amei olenu delo mevatle, the rabbis yesterday, with the goat blood and the cow's blood, they had said that in that case, since the cow's blood and the goat's blood are both going to be offered as korbanos, or as part of korbanos, so that's why they're not batel. But otherwise, if we're just talking about min b'mino pieces of meat, min b'mino would be batel. So even if we say that, let's say, 1 piece of nevela and 2 pieces of shchuta, and because the nevela could be like the shchuta, it's min b'mino. But so what? The Chacham would say this is not a korban. Nevela, shchuta, this is not a korban. And therefore, min b'mino is bottle. So therefore, Reb Chanina and Reb Chizda are not going according to the Rabbanan, because in principle the rabbis say even min b'mino is bottle. So again, if according to the rabbis or Amri, they say olin hu tilo mevat le'adad. When we're talking about two korbanos that get mixed together with each other, there's no bittul. Now, min b'mino in general, bottle, of course it's bottle. Now, if it's according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda basur chazusa azil. Now, Rabbi Yehuda, as we saw yesterday, by the goat's blood and the cow's blood, his conclusion was, his takeaway was, min b'mino is not bottle. It maintains its integrity. However, Rabbi Yehuda says we would go based on the looks of things, meaning, what do we have here? 3 pieces of meat. They all look like meat. Sure, this one's nevela, this one's chotei. At the end of the day, it's min b'mino. 3 pieces of meat. The nevela looks no different than the chotei. It's all the same. And because we're talking about 3 pieces of meat, it's by definition min b'mino. And Rabbi Yehuda would say min b'mino is not bottle, like we saw by the cow's blood and the goat's blood. Min b'mino is not bottle. I don't care that we're talking about shchuta, that we're talking about nevela, shchuta combinations. It's all meat, it's all min b'mino, and nothing is bottle. Don't try telling me that a piece of shchuta that gets mixed together with 2 pieces of nevela is min b'sheinu mino. No, it's min b'mino, it's not bottle. So rather, Reb Chanina and Reb Chizda are giving their respective opinions based on Reb Chia. The Tani Reb Chia taught nevela v'shchuta betelos zo bazo. That nevela and shchuta can be batel together. Nevela and shchuta there can be bittul over there. And comes Reb Chizda and Reb Chanina to explain, to interpret, what does Reb Chia mean by nevela and shchuta can be betelos zo bazo. So Reb Chizda and Reb Chanina come to explain that, well, you could say that the shchuta and the nevela could be either min b'mino, min b'sheino mino, depending on if we're talking about the nevela, which could be like the shchuta, or the shchuta which cannot be like the nevela. Reb Chizda says to go based on the mevatel. Reb Chanina says to go based on the bottle. So Reb Chanina and Reb Chizda are coming to explain Reb Chia, who had said nevela shchuta betelo zo bazo. But now, fact the Gemara, Reb Chia liba deman. Who's Reb Chia going based on? Now, interestingly, Reb Chia is kind of at the very end of the Tanoim, kind of borderline Amoraim. Reb Chia was Rav's uncle. Now, Rav already, sometimes the Gemara says Rav Tano Upolik, that Rav really is the first generation Amora, but he can even sometimes be considered a Tana. His uncle was Reb Chia. Reb Chia was the same generation, I believe, as Rebbe. I don't know exactly the same generation, maybe slightly younger, but I think it was basically the same generation as Rebbe. So I think he's technically considered a Tana, but interestingly over here, right, you would never say, like by Rabbi Yehuda or something, who does he hold like? He holds like himself, he's Rabbi Yehuda. Yet by Rabbi Chia, we're saying, who does he hold like? Does he hold like the Rabbanan? Does he hold like Rabbi Yehuda? Who's Rabbi Chia holding like? Aliba deman. Aliba de Rabbanon, if Rabbi Chia is saying like the rabbis, but when we say that there is no bittul for min b'mino, min b'mino, that's only when we're talking about korbanis, are not mevatel each other. Min b'mino bottle, but in general, min b'mino is bottle. Now, if we're saying that Reb Chanina and Reb Chizda are coming to explain Reb Chia, and they both agree on the principle that min b'mino is not bottle, well, this can not be like the rabbis, because the rabbis say that that is only true when we're talking about korbanis, but if we're talking about meat, just random pieces of meat, they would say min b'mino is bottle, whereas the assumption with Reb Chanina and Reb Chizda, who are explaining Reb Chia, it is that min b'mino is not bottle, and therefore it cannot be the chachamim. The I'alibid Rabbi Yehuda, and if we're saying according to Rabbi Yehuda, called min b'mino, Rabbi Yehuda lo batu. Rabbi Yehuda, however, it said at the end of the day, this is all just meat. It's all min b'mino. There's no min b'she'eno mino over here. It's all just simply meat. And min b'mino is not batul. So what are we talking about? That you can have nevela mixed with shchuta and it's not batul because it's min b'mino. No. That shchuta can be mixed with nevela and it is batul because it's min b'she'eno mino. No. Rabbi Yehuda would say it's all min b'mino. It's all meat. So Shikmar answers, L'olam alibud Rabbi Yehuda. Really it is according to Rabbi Yehuda. And what we're explaining, what Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina are explaining according to Rav Chia, who holds like Rabbi Yehuda, is that Rabbi Yehuda min b'mino lo batul, that when Rabbi Yehuda says min b'mino is not batul, hanemile eicha de efshir le lemeave kavase. That is when it could be like the other thing. For example, nevela can be like shchuta. Therefore, we say it's min b'mino, and it is not batul. But shchuta is unable to be like nevela. So in that case, batul, even Rabbi Yehuda would agree that when we're talking about meat, which should be technically min b'mino, but if we're talking about shchuta, which is unable to be like nevela, so therefore it would be considered min b'she'eno mino, and it would be batul. Uvalka miflage, in the machlokas between Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina is to Rav Chizda savar batul mevatel aslinan. To Rav Chizda says we determine whether we're going based on nevela, which can be like shchuta, or whether we're going like shchuta, which cannot be like nevela, based on the mivatel. If we have 2 pieces of nevela, so we go based on nevela. If we have 2 pieces of shchuta, we go based on shchuta. Rav Chanina savar basar batul aslinan. Whereas Rav Chanina says we go based on the bottle, based on the one, and if the bottle one is shchuta, we say it's min b'she'enu mino, and if it's nevela, it is min b'mino. So machlokes between Rav Chizda and Rav Chanina is based on if we're going based on the mivatel or the bottle. I'm going to go and get myself some water because my throat I'm getting super dry. Tonight we learned in our Mishnah shtei menachos shelo nikmitzu. If you have 2 menachos, neither one was kometz yet, and they get mixed together. If you can kometz, right? So we'll call them Ruven the mincha and Shimon the mincha. They get mixed together. They're in the same bowl, but you can still determine, okay, this section is definitely purely Ruven the mincha, and that section is purely Shimon the mincha. You could separate a kometz from each one purely and cleanly, so go for it. Ksheris, and it's kosher. Ve'im lav, but if you would be unable to do that, soless, they are possible. Now, ve'ahacha. Interestingly, once you get into the weeds, into the details of how exactly this would work, you see that it's actually a little bit complicated. You see, what happens is, when you take a kometz from Ruven the mincha, so interestingly, again, Ruven the mincha and Shimon the mincha have gotten mixed together. They're a mixture. They're mixed together. Sure, you can identify parts of the mixture that is purely Ruven the kometz. Is purely Ruven the mincha. Part of the mixture is purely Shimon the mincha, and you can take a kometz from those parts. But they are mixed together. So now, interestingly, what happens is, when you separate a kometz from Ruven the mincha, so now in the mixture is Shimon the mincha mixed with the shirayim of Ruven the mincha. And now the question is, will the shirayim of Ruven the mincha, will Ruven the shirayim be mevatel whatever parts of Shimon the mincha have mixed with it? Now, if Ruven the shirayim will be mevatel any part of Shimon the mincha they got mixed in with it, well then it will be part of Ruven the shirayim now and won't be part of Shimon the mincha anymore, and Shimon the mincha will be lacking. And if Shimon the mincha is lacking, On Daf Tes, it was machlokes Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish of what to do, but it's not pashut anymore. It sounded like no big deal. Ruvain the mincha gets mixed together with Shimon the mincha. As long as you can identify which part is which, take a kometz from Ruvain the mincha, take a kometz from Shimon the mincha, all good. It's actually more complicated than that. Because once you take a kometz from Ruvain the mincha, what's left of Ruvain the mincha is shirayim. Now shirayim are unable to be burnt on the mizbeach, and if it's going to be mevatel if the shirayim of Ruvain the mincha is going to mevatel any parts of Shimon the mincha is lacking, and you can no longer take a kometz from it and burn it on the mizbeach. So again, the kometz once you take a kometz from Ruvain the mincha, idach, the remainder of Ruvain the mincha, havale shirayim is shirayim, v'lo kamevatle shirayim letivla. And yet we see that you can go ahead and take a kometz from Shimon the mincha, which means therefore that clearly each mincha is retaining its integrity. Ruvain the shirayim remain Ruvain the shirayim in all of its, if completely. And Shimon the mincha entirely remains Shimon the mincha, and therefore kometz can be separated from it. So money, who would say that? Who would say that no part of Shimon the mincha is being bottled to Ruvain the shirayim? Rabbanon, it can't be the Rabbanon, because Amri Olin hu dilo mivatle adade. They said that only by the blood of the cow and the blood of the goat, since they're both korbanos, they are not mivatel min bimino. Hamin bimino batul. But generally speaking, min bimino would be batul, and therefore you have all this flour, Ruvain the mincha, Shimon the mincha. A kometz was taken from Ruvain the mincha. The Chacham would say that any parts of Shimon the mincha that got mixed into Ruvain the shirayim would be batul to Ruvain the shirayim, which means that Shimon the mincha would be lacking, according to the Rabbanan, who say that min b'mino is batul. The exception being when we're talking about korbanos, but once already the kometz has been taken from Ruvain the mincha, we're talking about shirayim. We're not talking about korbanos anymore. Part of the mixture is shirayim, which can't be burnt on the mizbeach. Elapshita Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so therefore it must be that the Mishnah is like Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Bishlam Lamanda Omar bottle as Basar bottle as in. So now, what do we have here? So we're saying that Ruvain the shirayim will not be mevatel any parts of Shimon the mincha that come into it. Now Shimon the mincha can become like Ruvain the shirayim. Once a kometz is taken from Shimon the mincha, it becomes shirayim, just like Ruvain the shirayim. Ruvain the shirayim cannot become like Shimon the mincha, but Shimon the mincha can become like Ruvain the shirayim once a kometz is taken from it. So if we go based on, like Reb Chanina is saying, that based on the bottle, that if any part of Shimon the mincha gets mixed with Ruvain the shirayim, so if we go based on, like Reb Chanina, based on the bottle, based on the parts of Shimon the mincha that are getting mixed in, now since Shimon the mincha can become like Ruvain the shirayim, once a kometz is taken from it, so therefore it's min b'mino. Min b'mino is not bottle, and therefore each one retains its integrity, and therefore you can still take a kometz Shimon the mincha, because they each maintain their integrity. So Bishlama Lamanda Amar Basar bottle, as in, I understand according to Abchanino, who says we go based on the bottle party, which is in this case is Shimon the mincha, which is able to become like Ruvain the shirayim once a kometz is taken from it. Bottle. So where am I? So bottle avekim avato. So the Shimon the mincha is able to become like Ruvain the shirayim. The chikometz meidach havalu shirayim kiane. That once a kometz is taken from Shimon the mincha, so it will become shirayim just like Ruvain the shirayim, and therefore it's min b'mino, and each retains its integrity. But according to Rav Chisda, it says we go based on the mevatel, which is Reuven the Shirayim, well then Reuven the Shirayim will be Mavato, whatever parts of Shimon the Mincha got mixed with it, which means that they become part of Reuven the Shirayim, and Shimon the Mincha is lacking, and how can you separate a kometz from it anymore? So Elamadam Rabbosim Mavato Lazlinon, which in this case is Reuven the Shirayim, Shirayim Yikahava Tivla, the Shirayim is not able to become Tevel. Tevel referring to, meaning Tevel is a borrowed term. Usually Tevel refers to untied produce. Here it's talking about an unkometzed mincha. So the Shirayim, Reuven the Shirayim, is unable to be like Shimon the mincha, and therefore it's min b'she'enu mino, and therefore whatever parts of Shimon the mincha got mixed with Reuven the Shirayim would be bottled to Reuven the Shirayim, which means that Shimon the mincha is lacking, and how can you kometz it? So let's say that according to Rav Chizda, who says it's based on the Mavatal, well then this Mishnah makes no sense, and therefore it must be that this Mishnah is unlike Rav Chia. So Hasim could do Rav Zera. So Rav Chizda is going to have to say, yes, you're correct, and the Mishnah is like Rav Zera responds. The Amr Rav Zera says, Rav Zera, Nemra Aktara b'kometz, it says Aktara by the kometz, of course you burn the kometz in the Mizbeach. V'nemra Aktara b'shirayim, and also it says Aktara by the shirayim, as we mentioned earlier. Lo saktir mimenu isha l'Hashem, kol shemenu isha l'Hashem, don't burn. Basically, you're not allowed to burn shirayim. It says burning in the context of the kometz, it says burning in the context of the shirayim. Ma Aktara amur b'kometz, just like it says Aktara by the kometz, and ein ha-kometz mevatel es chaveru, a kometz is not mevatel another kometz. Safaktora amur b'shirayim, ain't shirayim mevatel and it's a kometz. Shirayim is not mevatel kometz, and in this case, kilu the shirayim, Reuven the shirayim is not mevatel Shimon the mincha, from which a kometz can be taken. So it's extending to Shimon the mincha. Okay, so we're saying that the Mishnah, so Rav Chizda would say this Mishnah reflects the explanation of Rav Zera, which is, or would be explained like Rav Zera, that Reuven the Shirayim would be unable to be Mevatel Shimon the Mincha. Sheesh, my brain is like starting to slow. But okay, we're moving towards the end. Wow. I've been recording so far for 2 hours and 15 minutes. Woo! Insane. Tashma Kamanir. HaKometz shenisayv b'mincha. By the way, if you're wondering about my chavrusa, I messaged him. I'm not making. I have to record this. I can't fall behind again. Tashma HaKometz shenisayv b'mincha. Oh, I have water. Let me take a little water. 1 second. Okay, our Mishnah had continued and said, HaKometz shenisayv b'mincha shelo nikmitza. If Reuven the kometz gets mixed together with Shimon the mincha, that no kometz has been kometzed from it. So Reuven, the kometz that gets mixed together with Shimon, the complete mincha, that has not yet been kometzed. Lo yakter, don't burn the whole combination. Ve'im hikter, but if you did burn the whole combination, zo shenikmitza, Reuven the mincha, which was kometzed, also the Bailim will work for Reuven who offered it. V'zo shelo nikmitza, and Shimon the mincha, where no kometz was separated from it, lo, also the Bailim does not count for Shimon. So what's interesting is that we see that Reuven the kometz fell into Shimon the mincha, and Reuven the kometz maintained its integrity such that if you went ahead and burned the whole mixture, even though you shouldn't, but if you went ahead and burnt it, Reuven will be yotzei because his mincha was burnt. It retained its integrity. V'loka mavtil lei tivla lekometz, and Shimon the mincha was not mevatel Reuven the kometz. It maintained its integrity, and therefore Reuven is yotzei. Money, who's the author of this? If it's the rabbis, Amrei Olin udilo mivatle adade. They said, look, when we say min b'minu is not bottle, that's specifically when we're talking about two things that go on the mizbeach, the goat's blood, the cow's blood. Min b'mino bottle, but in general, min b'mino, would be batel, and therefore if we have lots of flour, Reuven the kometz, Shimon the mincha, Reuven the kometz would be batel to Shimon the mincha, according to Rabbanan. El Pshita Rabbi Yehuda. Rather, it must be according to Rabbi Yehuda. So now what do we see? What's going on over here? So Reuven the kometz is not batel to Shimon the mincha. Now Shimon the mincha can become like Reuven the kometz. Reuven the kometz cannot become like Shimon the mincha. So therefore, if we're going to say that Reuven the kometz retained its integrity, it would because it's min b'mino. Min b'mino would have to be from the perspective of Shimon the mincha, which can become like Reuven the kometz, right? Any part of Shimon the mincha is potential kometz material. And therefore, it makes sense according to Rav Chizda, who says that we go based on the perspective of the mivatel. So, I understand according to Rav Chizda, who says we go based on the mivatel. So, mivatel ave kibatel, the mivatel, the Shimon the mincha, can be like Reuven the kometz. Any part of Shimon the mincha can potentially be included in a kometz, and therefore it's min b'mino. Any little bit of Shimon the mincha could be potential kometz material, and therefore it's min b'mino. Babble min v'mino umin v'mino lo batil. Elamanda Omar basur batil azlinen. But according to Chanina, who says we go based on the batil, the one that stands to be batil, i.e., the Reuven the kometz. Well, Reuven the kometz can't be like Shimon the mincha, and therefore it's min b'she'enu mino, it should be batel. So Elamanda Omar basur batil azlinen kometz mika avek tivla. Can Reuven the kometz ever be like Shimon the mincha? No. So that would have to therefore be this section of the Mishnah must be unlike Reb Chia. So Anami Reb Zera, well, Reb Chanina would explain this like Reb Zera, that just like the kometz is not mevatel, neither are the shiraim, and I guess that would apply even to Shimon. Well, that would apply to, right, I guess Shimon the mincha would not be mevatel Reuven the kometz. Fine. Tashma kamanir nisa'ariv kumtza. So you could change this b'shiareh or b'shiraim shachaveta, right? The Mishnah had said that if Reuven the kometz gets mixed together with Reuven the shiraim or Shimon the shiraim, lo yakter, don't burn this combination. V'mikter also l'baylim, and if you do, it works for Reuven. So what's interesting about here is that either direction is unworkable. Reuven the kometz, right? If we just take, for example, Reuven the kometz that got mixed together with Reuven the shiraim, well, Reuven the kometz can never be like Reuven the shiraim, and Reuven the shiraim can never be like Reuven the kometz. And yet we're saying that Reuven the kometz maintains its integrity. Right? We said lo yakter, don't burn it. V'mikter also levayim. If you did, it works for Reuven. V'acha delo ave mevatel. There's a change of gears, which is good. Right? Lo ave mevatel kabatel, lo batel kabatel. Right? Either way, right? Reuven the kometz can't be like Shimon, like Reuven the shiraim, nor can Reuven the shiraim be like Reuven the kometz. And yet, v'lo kamevatle le shiraim the kometz. And yet, Reuven the kometz retains its integrity. Money, who's just like ira ban v'chulei, right? We go through this whole thing. Can't be the rabbis. They would say min b'mino is batel. So what do we say? So Reb Zera says Reb Zera. So here it's like neither Reb Chanina nor like Reb Chizda. So Reb Zera says Reb Zera nemer aktar b'kometz. Well, it says aktar by the kometz. V'nemer aktar b'shirayim, and it says aktar by the shirayim. Aktar amur b'kometz, just like by the kometz. In kometz mevatel as chaveru. One kometz is not mevatel another chaveru. Another kometz af aktar amur b'shirayim. Also the aktar that's by the shirayim ain't shirayim mevatel as a kometz. Shirayim is not mevatel kometz. So if we're saying, wouldn't Reuven the shirayim be mevatel Reuven the kometz? The answer is no. It's like Reb Zera that shirayim are not mevatel kometz. Sheesh, I need water. Okay, and now finally to wrap up this humongous daf. Tashma kamanir tivla beketzach besumsimin uvchomin etavlin kshera. If matzah was seasoned with ketzach, In my mind, I'm imagining these like black seeds that I don't particularly care for. Besumsmin, sesame seeds, v'chomine, tavlin, or different types of spices. Kshera, the matzah is nonetheless kshera. Matzah, it is in fact matzah, ela shenikres matzah mitubeles, it's just called seasoned matzah. Because Haggadah rents remind the apish la tavlin tvemi matzah. And we're assuming for now that you put on so much of these spices that there was more spices, right? You put on so much sesame seeds, there was more sesame seeds than there was matzah. So Bishlam Lamanda Omar Basar bottle as linon. I understand if we say we go based on the bottle, which in this case is the matzah that stands to be bottled by all those sesame seeds. So where am I? Bishlam Basar bottle as linon. Bottle avik imavatal. The matzah can become like the sesame seeds. When the matzah, when the matzah kind of gets moldy, havla kitavlin will no longer be considered matzah. It'll just be considered, no different than any of those other spices. So if that's the case, it's min b'mino, and therefore the matzah is not bottled, and it's still considered matzah. Lamanda Omer, but basically, like Rav Chizda says, we go based on the mivatel, which should be min b'sheinu mino, and the matzah should be bottled. So tavlin miko avu matzah, can the sesame seeds, for example, become like matzah? No. Well, well, here it's talking about where there aren't more spices than matzah. Deruba matzah, it's mostly matzah v'lo betela, and therefore it is not bottle. The Kanaminis can also be inferred. The Ketani that says matzah, shnikris matzah mitubelis, because after all it says it's called matzah, just that it's called matzah mitubelis, but it is considered matzah, and the main part is matzah. It's the rov shmamina. So there you have it. It's rov matzah, friends. Oh, sheesh. Right after that big win, right into a brick wall. But Al Kaponim was a good daf though. All right, friends, that was daf Chaf Gimel. That's gonna be a memorable one. When I finally managed to get ahead after months, and right when I thought I was gonna get ahead, not even one day goes by, and I'm already like hours late. My gosh. Okay. Anyways, Minchas soless, a kometz of Minchas soless that gets mixed together with Minchas nesachim. We explored Rabbi Yehuda's opinion there, who said it's a big problem. We asked, wait, but it should be min b'mino, and there shouldn't be any problems at all. So Rav had said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when you have min b'mino and there's a davar acher there, so you remove the min and see what happens. Then you basically, so in this case, basically, we went in through all that stuff, but it would be a problem, suffice it to say. We discussed adding oil to a minchas chotei kometz. Rabbi Yochanan said pasul, Rish Lakish said kosher, and then we digged into same type mixtures, so relative subcategories of same types, for example, shchuta and nevela meat, right? So even though you have different pieces of meat, so it's all the same type, but even within that, there can be shchuta, there could be nevela could be like shchuta cannot be like nevela, and therefore, so according to the rabbis, even min b'mino is in fact batel. When it comes to korbanos, it's not batel, it retains its integrity. But other than that, min b'mino is batel, and it doesn't really matter if we're talking about shchuta or nevela, it's going to be batel barov. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda says min b'mino is not batel, right? So within meat, if you have min b'mino, then it is not batel. Min b'sheinu mino is batel. Rav Chizda says, and min b'mino versus min b'sheinu mino is determined based on the mivatel. Rav Chanina says it's determined based on the batel. Friends, that was Daf Chav Gimel of Masechta Menachos. Hope you enjoyed. Cheers.